The risen Lord revealed himself to the disciples once again by the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Very familiar territory. Remember that in the Gospels, Jesus said he'd meet them in the Galilee. That's north from Jerusalem, quite some way. They'd been fishing all night and they caught nothing, doing the very thing that they're used to doing, and they couldn't do it well. And Jesus instructs them to cast their net on the right side of the boat. Now that's important, that he who's not a fisherman tells the fisherman what to do. And Peter then realized it was Jesus, and he was the first to respond, so typical of him. And as the disciples bring in the fish, Jesus is cooking breakfast. There's something very important about meals. We heard a little bit about that with our guests. And there's something similar to the Emmaus Road account at the end of Luke that we find in this particular passage. And it's after breakfast that we read these words. Let me read to you from John 21 and verses 15 to 19. When they'd finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he came to him and said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." So it's back to square one. What do you do when everything's gone wrong, when it feels like everything has failed? Well, you often go back to what you believe is familiar, what you think you can do well, what you know that it's all about. If you're a chef, you go back to cooking. If you do sport, you'll go back to that. Whatever it is that you find that is your particular aspect of life. And for the fishermen, they go back to fishing, perhaps hoping that they might pick up in the fragments of this experience something that will help them feel good about themselves and help them feel some kind of confidence after the despair of all that had happened in the week that had gone before. How often love and food are intricately connected. That's true in the ministry of Jesus. You remember how he had a meal with Zacchaeus, and how there were times when at meal tables people were encountered, Dives and Lazarus, with issues about poverty and justice. Meals were so important. That marvelous preparation of a meal with Martha and Mary, so many of them, they're intricately connected. And here in the meal, there is a sense of God's presence and love. And Jesus fed the disciples both physically and spiritually. But the main part of the second section in John 21 is the fact that Peter needed to be reinstated. Only Jesus could do that. He couldn't reinstate himself. He couldn't say, "Right now I'm back in the team." He needed to hear the captain of the team, the leader of the group, the Savior himself, reinstate him to his position as one of the disciples. Jesus asked Peter 3 times, in the same way that 3 times he'd known what it was to deny him, so it was now 3 times he asks him if he loves him. Well, of course he loves him. I can understand why it is that Peter felt hurt that Jesus persisted in his questioning. But it's so important that we understand that for Jesus, this was important. For if Peter is going to be reinstated, there has to be a certainty about his ministry. There has to be a confidence about his ministry. And there has to be a way in which he's gone on this journey of reinstatement, which is a real reinstatement of faith. And for Peter, who is going to be, by the time Pentecost arrives, the great leader of the Christian community, he's going to be the one that stands up and all the disciples with him at Pentecost. When that happens, there needs to be the confidence that has come through reinstatement. Many people have looked at this passage. They've talked about the different uses of words, about love and the different ways in which Jesus talks about it. But there is no doubt that Peter is being given an important ministry. He's told to feed the sheep. He's told, if you like, to become part of that ministry, to reach out to sheep that are beyond simply the flock of Israel, but for all the world. And Peter is prepared to respond in that way. And very interesting, really, that the final words in the section, that before the very end of the gospel, we're told that he said to him, "Follow me." Gosh, those words take us right back to the lakeside. They're right back to the original calling of Jesus and the disciples. Follow me. Well, that's what he's been trying to do, but how he failed, how he knew what it was in the darkness to deny, how he knew what it was like in the firelight in the courtyard to deny Jesus, so that he even knew him, even when he was questioned about his accent. But now, follow me. And he's prepared to do it. Oh, he's prepared to follow him, and his following, as we're told here, will be to the very end, with all the extent of giving his life. And all tradition tells us that Peter died for Christ. And we're just grateful that his marvelous reinstatement is a story for all of us, that when we're tested to the very limit, God can bring us to that place of healing and total wholeness.